Hello, and welcome to the Book Club Review. I'm Laura.
I'm Kate, and this is the podcast about book clubs and the books that get people talking.
Today we bring you our summer reading report, where we take a look back at the books we've been reading over the holidays, and then take a look ahead to the ones we're looking forward to this September.
Here in the UK, I've been reading like a demon, and I can't wait to tell you about Olivia Laing's new memoir, The Garden Against Time, Rita Bullwinkel's Booker long-listed novel set in the world of female boxing, Headshot, and I finally got around to reading Trust by Hernan Diaz, the Pulitzer-winning hit from a couple of years back. Oh, and Miranda July's perimenopause novel, All Fours. Other gems I could talk about if there's time include Thunderclap, Laura Cummings' fascinating book about Carol Fabricius and the golden age of Dutch art, and the book I adored, which kicked off my summer season, Greta and Valdin by Rebecca K. Reilly. Let's see how we go.
Not to be outdone, I'll be reporting back on multi-generational family saga Real Americans by Rachel Khong, classic fantasy The Last Unicorn by Peter S. Beagle, the latest twisty-turny novel from Stuart Turton, The Last Murder at the End of the World, Reese's book club pick, Slow Dance by Rainbow Rowell, and Come and Get It by Kiley Reid, whose debut, Such a Fun Age, made a big splash back in 2019.
We'll also run through the books we've currently got on the go and the ones we can't wait to get to. All that coming up here on the Book Club Review.
But first, a quick word about our episode sponsors, Serious Readers.
Hey listeners, before we get started, let me just tell you about our sponsors for this episode, Serious Readers, who make these lights that Laura and I love.
We are big fans. What makes the lights special? Well, they feature daylight wavelength technology, which replicates the daylight spectrum.
What that means is that your eyes get the light that they need, with the result that words stand out more clearly on the page, your eyes get less tired, and Laura and I found we were able to focus more easily. All of which is good news if you're serious about reading.
An added bonus is you can read in bed without the light annoying your partner, because the beam is so contained.
So if you're interested to try them out, we have a special offer for you. If you visit seriousreaders.com/BCR using the code BCR, you get £100 off any HD light, and you'll also get free delivery.
And what I'd say is give them a try. You have 30 days to decide if it's right for you, and if you're anything like us, you won't want to send them back. How are you getting on with your lights, Kate?
The only problem with my holiday house where I currently am, which I love so much, is that I miss my lights. I'm so depressed about leaving this lovely town by the sea. I had to make a list of things that I'm looking forward to when I go back to London. And my Serious Readers lights are on that list.
Well, we've got a lot to cover, so the plan is quantity but brevity. Did you hear that, listeners? Brevity. This is going to be a challenge for Kate. I mean, it's all for you, listeners. We wanted to give you the full take on what we've been reading this summer. I've been reading light, so maybe I'll get started with Kate, because I feel like she has some more serious literary novels on there, and then I can dig into my light pleasure reading.
Well, that's funny, because when I saw your list of books, I was like, oh, I can't wait to hear about all those books. All these books sound so great. I would love to talk about, just because I feel like I haven't really talked about it on the pod, the book I read just before I came away on a Patreon member's recommendation, Nicola, who is in New Zealand. And she recommended this book, Greta and Valdin, by Rebecca K. Reilly, which I hadn't heard of, but it has been published here in the UK. It's got quite a distinctive bright pink cover with a bag of bright green limes on it. I didn't know anything about it. It's not the sort of book I would have picked up just from the title. Nothing about that would particularly grab me, but she'd said it was really funny, really enjoyable, recommended it. And so idly, I got a copy and thought I'd give it a try. And I loved it so much. It's quite a complicated, well, it's sort of complicated, but also not complicated. It's basically, at heart, this family story, and it's two siblings. The siblings are Greta and Valdin, and they are early 20s, just sort of navigating life as adults. They are both gay. There's lots of stuff about relationships, but it's quite interesting, I suppose, this perspective, which is one that I'm not so used to reading about, that I really enjoyed. But in other ways, it's very conventional because it's all about the romances and that sort of crushes that they have and the relationships. But also it's equally about their relationship with each other and their relationship with their family. And their family is deliciously complicated because there are all these different branches. They live in New Zealand. Their father's side of the family are Russian. Their mother's side of the family are Maori. So they have these two very interesting cultural strands in their family makeup. There's also a branch of the family who hail from Spain and also South America. So there's this Spanish thread that runs through it. And not much actually happens in the book. But line by line, it was so funny, so charming. You absolutely fall in love with these characters, probably from the first page. And I really cared about them, and I cared about what happened to them, and I loved the ride. I loved going along. And there is a family secret that's bubbling away that eventually they find. I think that's what was going on. I can't even remember now. It felt like it wasn't crucial at all. It was just an excuse to spend time with these characters and experience this author's delightful way of exploring this family and these two people who I loved. So I really, really, really recommend it. It was a joy. It was an absolute joy.
I'm intrigued. I would like to read it. That cover would appeal to me as well. Although I wonder if it's even in the US/Canada. Probably.
It was a bestseller in New Zealand, I think, for a couple of years, and it was just published here in the UK this spring. One of the things which I love, which is also very typical of it, is that you never really find out why there's a bag of limes on the cover. I kept thinking there would be some moment, like some reveal. I'm not sure there ever was, but you know what? It doesn't matter.
It is available in Canada and North America, and indeed it is pink with that green cover. The lime is falling out. Maybe it's a metaphor. Maybe the bag of limes, one's about to slip out. Family members were all limes in one bag together.
I mean, I worry slightly. It may have meant something significant and I just missed it. It's actually a novel I could easily imagine rereading because it was so rich. I can't remember anything I've enjoyed more almost on a sentence by sentence level. I think that was just the thing. It was so charming and funny, genuinely like Elif Batuman, laugh out loud funny, observational stuff all the way through it. And I suppose also I sometimes feel a bit of a disconnect when I'm reading about people in their 20s, because for me that's like, oh, yes, I remember what it was like to have those thoughts and feelings, but it doesn't feel particularly relevant to where I am in my life now. And I loved with this that there wasn't that. I didn't feel any distance. You know, I was right there with these characters all the way. And I think it's because it's so woven into this family makeup, which feels very much like all of us. You know, we all exist within these networks. And that felt very true to me.
Nice.
How about you?
All right, so starting off strong with a real recommendation, I will start us off with a recommendation. How do I want to phrase this? A not to read recommendation. I started reading Real Americans by Rachel Khong on my Kindle. I can't remember why it bubbled up on my radar, but it sounded interesting. And I started reading the first 10% on Amazon. And I think got about 5 or 6, 7% in. And I was like, you know what? This is really good. I was heading off on holiday with my family to San Juan Island in northern Washington state, and they have a bookshop. So I went to the grocery store. I volunteered to go with my sister-in-law to the grocery store, which obviously meant immediately going into the bookshop and doing a quick dash shop to get my books for the holiday. Yes. And then did my due diligence in the grocery store. And I picked up Real Americans by Rachel Khong, and I also picked up The Last Unicorn by Peter S. Beagle. I'll speak to that one next. And as I say, I had started Real Americans and I thought it was going to be a very different novel because about the first quarter is focused on Lily Chen. She's 22. It's the year 2000 and she's an unpaid intern working at a media company. Her parents were Chinese and emigrated to the US. They were scientists who fled the Cultural Revolution. She's flat broke. She's an unpaid intern and she's trying to make ends meet and get a foothold in the industry. And at their Christmas party, so I guess this is Christmas 1999, she meets Matthew, who is incredibly handsome, incredibly charming, and somehow related to the senior leader at this media company. So he's from very wealthy roots, establishment roots, very white. And they have a romance over a few weeks there. Actually, in that framework, it reminded me a little bit of Pineapple Street, which we read last summer, maybe? Jenny Jackson's Pineapple Street. And I was like, okay, well, this feels a little bit familiar. Like I've been here with this examination of extreme wealth and, you know, relationships across that divide, but still very readable. And then I should have known this from the flap, although as I say, I kind of just fell into it on Kindle and then didn't really think about what I was getting into. So it starts off in this world, and then you know from the flap that it's going to fast forward 21 years, because the flap says in 2021, 15-year-old Nick Chen feels like an outsider on the isolated Washington island where he lives with his single mother, Lily. So we know that some 21 years on, Lily is a single mother living in Washington. We don't know what's happened between her and Matthew. And so you're waiting for this twist to come. There aren't really any flashbacks. It's like a hard divide from the year 2000 flashing forward. And then what's most confusing, it isn't confusing, but it isn't mentioned in the flap because it is a bit of a mystery, is how they're, I don't want to give anything away, but there's this thread. It's in the title a little bit, Real Americans. And you think, okay, well, this is going to be related to race. And race is definitely a thread through the novel. But her parents, actually both their parents, are involved in genetics and genetic manipulation. And their parents have had some connection in the past. This all sounds really interesting, doesn't it? Because that's the thing.
Yeah.
Even if I had known that, I would have been like, great, that sounds so interesting. What do you mean? We've gone from
I'm like, where's the problem? This
romance?
Sounds great. Yeah.
Yes. We've gone from standard romance into genetic science and manipulation and what does it mean to be a real American? But it just didn't hang together. The characters in the beginning, who you really do root for and fall in love with, absolutely disintegrate in terms of continuity and some consistency. Like you lose the thread. Lily, 21 years ahead, seems to have no connection back to that Lily then. And this rupture that occurs, which you guess is going to come, you understand while it's there, but it's so underdeveloped in terms of these two people navigating it, having conversations about it, splitting up. It really lost me. And
what a shame.
So it's very ambitious, and I really thought that I was going to like it a lot. My friend Affy read it because I mentioned to my book club that I was starting to read it. I suggested we might read it. They didn't take me up on that, but Affy picked it up. She sent me a message when I just finished it, and she's like, oh, I picked up Real Americans, and I'm really enjoying it. I was like, oh no. I was like, well, the first quarter is really good, but then it all falls apart. And she was a little bit more positive. She said she knew what I meant in the middle, that it was a little bit sloppy is too harsh a word, but it just didn't really fully make sense in terms of the characters and what was happening to them and the decisions they were making. She felt Rachel Khong turned it around towards the end. Not a hard read, and certainly I'm alone, right? Because on the back, there's a ton of people who we admire, like Britt Bennett and Andrew Sean Greer and Raven Lalani recommending it.
Yeah, I'm idly looking on Goodreads, and it seems to have done quite well there. People generally, the average rating is 4 stars.
I wanted to buy it in hardcover, and had a nice conversation with the bookshop owner about how irritating it is when they print book club stickers and quote marks onto jackets. Real Americans, it was selected for the Read with Jenna book club, but rather than actually putting a sticker on it, they embed it in the cover, which is deeply annoying because I don't want to read with Jenna. I just want to read by myself.
When it looks like a sticker, but it's not actually a sticker.
It's just a thing printed into my beautiful, quite beautiful jacket.
You know that reviewer we really like on Goodreads, Roman Claudia? She gave it 2 stars. She said, overall,
Yes.
I felt the parts were greater than the whole in this book, as it never really hangs together cohesively. Laura, Are you Roman Claudia?
I wish. They sound far more articulate than me.
I know, that's how I feel about Roman Claudia as well. I like Lily's story about assimilation and motherhood, but the next generation of her son, Nick, left me cold. There's a magical element too, which never felt right, and the writing was too mundane for my taste, with lots of non sequiturs. Do we need to know that a mirror is splattered with white toothpaste marks, for example? I was mentally crossing through so much verbiage in my head, which is a shame, as there's some genuinely emotive and moving stuff here about families and forgiveness, but it all gets lost under so much stuff. One of those texts where there's a far more streamlined and effective book hidden under the lack of editing.
That is very well put. I am not they, alas. But that does explain a lot of my issues with the book. Because when you do describe it high level, you think, oh, this is going to be great. It is ambitious. There are a lot of themes. There's a lot of plot, a lot of intrigue, but nope, doesn't hang together.
Well, I was on a bit of a roll because I went from one book I loved to another. Let me just grab it. Hang on. I've got a stack of books I meant to talk about that I brilliantly placed just out of my reach. So this is The Garden Against Time by Olivia Laing. Are you familiar with Olivia Laing?
I feel like I've read Olivia Laing, but I have not read Olivia Laing.
She wrote The Lonely City, Everybody Funny Weather. Crudo, her novel, I read and really loved.
Okay, I have read Olivia Laing because I read Crudo.
I like The Lonely City, although I found it she's quite I feel like there's always a sort of thread of melancholy in her work. And sometimes I think it's very beautiful and her writing is poetic and lovely, but sometimes I'm not in the mood for this slightly downbeat sort of, it's not even a mood. It's not as strong as that, but I feel it's there, and it's not. I haven't always loved that. But I was curious about The Garden Against Time because what I do love is reading. I'm not a gardener, but I do love reading about gardening. I love reading about plants, and I love reading about people who understand what to me feels like witchcraft, which is knowing what grows and where and how to make things flourish and all of that, which I'm just so interested in and utterly incapable of doing myself. This also has a really beautiful cover in the UK and also in America, where it's got a much more vibrant, almost slightly edgy cover with very bold yellow, whereas here it's much more like it's a beautiful Dutch painting. That's interesting because on the one hand it is this memoir about her experience of restoring this garden that she acquired when she and her partner bought a house here in Suffolk, in a village set back from the Suffolk coast. So on the one hand, it's this practical story of returning this garden to the vision of the original garden designer that she then researches. And he was a very well-known gardener and plantsman, and so she's interested in following his vision. But it's also this fascinating look at the garden as a political space and the idea of ownership and property and wealth. She goes back and looks, for example, at things like enclosure, which is what happened here historically, where large areas of land that previously had belonged to everybody were enclosed and taken away from the people and suddenly became private property. The whole system changed and people didn't really have any say in it, and it radically changed the landscape of the country as well as the social structure and economy. And she looks at these great estates where the gardens were remodeled by names that we're quite familiar with, like Capability Brown and Humphrey Repton, and looks at how those gardens and making those gardens involved sometimes moving entire villages so that these great houses could have these uninterrupted, seemingly wild landscapes to look out on. So it touches on all of that as well, and it's all woven together. And the idea of money and looking at where a lot of this money came from, and the plantations and the British Empire and the wealth that was coming back to the UK from slavery, and this very dark aspect to the money that was coming in, tracing all of that. And it was all woven together so brilliantly and expertly. I was never bored. I absolutely loved it, and beautifully written in the way that she does. You know, that feels like it goes without saying. It was so lovely. And she also looks at contemporary stuff. So she looks at Derek Jarman's garden down at Dungeness, another remote part of the coastline here in the UK, where he created this magical garden out of nothing. There was barely any earth where he has his garden. It's a shingle garden. And yet he managed to cultivate plants that would thrive there and created beauty. And the garden itself was almost a form of protest to show that he could do this even as he was suffering and dying of AIDS. So it's all in there, and it was just a total delight. I absolutely loved it and really, really recommend it. It's a wonderful book.
So on a scale of 1 to 10, how downbeat was it?
It wasn't.
Well, it was the exception to the rule.
It was so rich as well. I've actually pitched it to my old book club, which I don't go to now because now I'm doing the podcast book club. But I pitched it to them and they've gone for it. And I think it will be a really, really, really good discussion book because there's so much to it. It's just such a rich subject and she explores it so beautifully. So one of the other things, of course, that's in there is time, because one of the things that as humans we're aware of is the temporary nature of our time on this earth. But the thing about gardens is that they're always renewing, and it's a different way of thinking about time in terms of seasons and annual renewal and things like trees, which go on for centuries. So all of that's in there as well. So I'll be very interested to hear what they make of it. But yeah, it's just great. It was really great.
It sounds very good.
And at this point, I was like, I can't choose a bad book. I'm on such a roll. Have I just got really brilliant at picking books? Or, what's happened? I was feeling a bit smug at this point.
Is there a punchline to that?
Well, only that I then read Headshot by Rita Bullwinkle. But maybe we should hear about another one of yours before I get to that.
Okay. All right. Because I feel like there may be a theme here where you have read a ton of books that you loved and would highly recommend. And I read a ton of books that I didn't love, but
But you read them.
But I read them?
Yeah.
Next up was The Last Unicorn by Peter S. Beagle.
Now, I had never heard of this. I had to look this up.
I think there's a movie, The Last Unicorn.
Well, when I looked it up, I was quite intrigued because I found this article in The Atlantic by Joseph Lindell. The headline got me. One of the best fantasy novels ever is nothing like The Lord of the Rings. In The Last Unicorn, there are no maps, invented languages, or epic battles, but the 1968 tale has a timely message about the importance of reality over magic.
I feel like I've missed something then.
You didn't get that.
Only the reality and magic piece. So what I would say is, the thing is, it's not really a fantasy novel in the sense that we understand the genre. It's much more of a fairy tale fable. And if it had any similarities to novels I've read in the fantastical tradition, it would be much more with children's novels, and in particular Ursula Le Guin's Earthsea Quartet, where not a word is out of place, but everything feels, I want to say like it's been said before, but that they're drawing on a tradition that is oral and not literary. That's not true. Both the Earthsea Quartet and The Last Unicorn, these are novels, they are original works, but there's something of the fable in them, something of the allegorical. And I think in both cases, they are written primarily for children or young adults, even though you absolutely can read them at a deeper level as an adult. So all of that is to say that it's a little bit boring. and
Ooh.
which sounds really damning, but I had such high hopes, partially because, it's not even partially, I had very high hopes because this edition that I have includes a new introduction by our friend Patrick Rothfuss, author of The Name of the Wind, and the man who'll write anything except the final book in his fantasy trilogy.
Tipped by me as one of my best books of the 21st century.
This is an aside, but I went to the Vancouver Public Library's Rooftop Remix, which is basically like a bookish social. It's so good, Kate. You arrive,
so
you put your name on a sticker, and underneath you put a book that you always recommend. And then you're like set off to roam. There's a book swap. So you bring 2 or 3 books and then you can take 2 or 3 books, just whatever you like. So there's book browsing, there's snacks, there's food, there's wine. And then, of course, it's all bookish people who actually just want to talk about books. What was my point?
I can't get over the idea of how great this party is.
It's a great party. It's really good. I went last year, and as soon as they were like, and now on your name tag, write a book that you would most recommend. And I was like, oh my goodness, this is the party for me. I bring it up because I was eavesdropping as I was browsing through the books, and a woman was saying, oh, The Name of the Wind, I love that book. And the other woman was saying, oh, I always recommend it to everyone, but he hasn't finished it. And I was like, yes, good choice. His introduction to The Last Unicorn is excellent. Can I just say, Patrick Rothfuss, what a great writer. Such an endearing voice. All I want to do is spend time with him in his novels. The same cannot be said of Peter S. Beagle. I mean, it's fine. It's not for me. Things happen.
I mean, it was written in 1968, apparently. And so I just wonder, is it dated or...
I don't think it's dated. It's just a fable, fairy tale, allegorical novel about a unicorn leaving the forest to find the other unicorns and picking up a pack of unlikely assorted characters to help her do so. The most memorable thing about it is that evil is represented in the form of the Red Bull. And, there's nothing inherently fearful about a Red Bull. And yet, as a symbol, there is something absolutely terrifying. And that's why it reminded me of Ursula Le Guin, who was very good at portraying fear and evil, which is really quite an abstract notion, but trying to pin it down with atmosphere. So those were my San Juan Island books, and I was disappointed.
Well, then, speaking of disappointed, I mean, it's tricky, isn't it, when we come to books, knowing that they've had a lot of praise, they've been lauded, and Headshot by Rita Bullwinkle has been longlisted for the Booker Prize. Sorry, just stretching out to get it. I should move the pile, but why would I do that when I can do this ridiculous balancing act every time? And the back, it's plastered with quotes from people saying how amazing it is. It's got quite a cool cover. The UK edition has anyway. And
I haven't heard of this. This is
you haven't
new.
heard of it? Is it new? So in the UK, it's published by Daunt Books.
For the Booker Prize.
Yeah, 2024.
Oh, yeah, it's new.
So I guess it's only recently come out. It's about young female boxers, and it's structured very obviously in a way in the form of a tournament. So you've got 8 contenders, and they are each fighting rounds against one another. So there are 4 initial rounds, and then of that 2 go through to the semi-finals, and then there is a final with 2 of the girls. And there's an idea at the novel's heart which I thought was interesting and well expressed, which is that women, unlike men, contain past, present and future. So this is built into us biologically, right? When a baby is born, that baby contains the eggs that will be her future children, and the mother, when she is pregnant with that baby, there is a moment where the mother contains effectively 3 generations, right? So we go forward and back in time in a way that she describes men, they're dead ends, they just exist. I mean, I don't actually think that's true, but that was the sort of, you know,
they do play an important role.
Yeah, I know, but I suppose in this sense of biological time, they're kind of they're different. And so then in the novel, the idea is that you experience these young women in the present where they are fighting their matches. In the past, you learn who they are and how they came to be boxing in the first place. And then you get a sense of what's going to happen to them in the future. So the tenses are all over the place. And the problem with that is that although it very beautifully expresses this idea that she comes to at the end of the book, and when I got there, I was like, okay, yep, you know, see that. The problem is it takes away any real connection or sense of excitement that you have in the moment, because the novel's always pulling back to tell you about the past, or it's jumping forward to the future. So as a result, you don't really care very much about what's happening in the ring at that moment. And also, strangely, I feel like I have just read other books about sport that did a much better job of capturing what's interesting and exciting about the sport. And I weirdly felt, I mean, I feel a bit mean saying it, but I somehow felt it almost did these female boxers a disservice because it didn't feel good enough to me. I really wanted more of a sense of physicality and passion and determination and how hard it was and what was going on in that moment than I got from this elegant, clever novel. So I don't know, because it wasn't bad. It really wasn't bad. It was well written. It was an idea that I thought was very well executed. And clearly loads and loads and loads of people who are not me really loved it.
I think you're onto something, though, because I plug it into Google and all of the establishment newspapers are saying great things. And then Goodreads is teasing a review that says, "It is a decently written book about a subject I had little interest in. There's very little hope or optimism for any of the characters." Further down, the Amazon review says, "I can't believe this book received rave reviews. The author gets inside the fighters' heads and riffs uninterestingly, self-indulgently, and interminably."
I mean, I don't agree with that. What I said on our WhatsApp chat, I messaged Martin, who came on the show to discuss the Booker books last year, and I know he's busy reading his way through the long list. Now, I don't generally read the whole long list. I idly pick this one up, but generally I wait till the shortlist is out, because then I know I'm going to be reading all those 6 books, and that's quite enough for me. But I know that he will read all of the long list and the shortlist. Anyway, I just pinged him and I was like, just finished Headshot. It makes me think fondly of the Chetna Maru, which was the book about squash that we did last year for the Booker, where I was also a bit nonplussed and didn't quite know what to make of it. But actually, compared to Headshot, I think it was a better book about sport. And actually, I came in time to appreciate something I thought was really special about that book, which is that it's about the echo, the resonance. There's something about the game of squash and the way that the ball moves and the sounds and the way it all happens that novel encapsulated. I just don't see that in Headshot, and I thought it was a shame. What I would say, as always, good book club book, I think there's lots to unpick and discuss, and it would be fun. You'd have fun doing it.
Oh, it's interesting. I have a high school friend who took up boxing, which I just think is so interesting. And really what I'm hearing from you is that there'd be so much to examine in terms of why boxing, right? Like why boxing over any other sport? But it sounds like you're not getting that motivation from the characters.
Weirdly, I think it's all in there. It's just the problem is this strangely detached view where you keep swooping forward and back in time. And that interrupts that. That's why it didn't work for me. I feel I could be quite clear about this. It was not bad, it was good, but this was the fundamental problem that to me didn't work, but maybe for other people it will. Maybe for the Booker judges it will. It'll be very interesting to see if it makes it to the shortlist.
Ugh, I hope not.
It's not a bad read. I didn't dislike reading it.
My next book club book is The Safe Keep, which is on the long list.
Oh, yeah.
It's the first Dutch novel that my book club has read, but more interestingly, that has ever been longlisted. I'm looking forward to that. That sounds very good. I'm also looking forward, this is a theme, to my reading going up a bar come fall, me returning to adult reading, because as I say, I felt a little bit sheepish about my reading. Now, this book I do recommend. It is our friend Stuart Turton who wrote The Seven Deaths of Evelyn Hardcastle.
Yes.
And then he wrote The Devil in the Dark Sea.
Which I loved.
And the man, he basically writes computer games. And there's something incredibly compelling about that. He writes these puzzles of a novel. They're murder mysteries. Actually, all three of them were murder mysteries. But they're unusual puzzles that he's constructed. And they remind me more than anything of a computer game where you have to kind of walk your character around to figure out what's happened and put the clues together. And it sounds like that wouldn't be a satisfying reading experience. And yet, it's just so distinctive. And I've read each of his books on holiday. First was a summer holiday in France when I was pregnant with my daughter. Then I read The Devil in the Dark Water at Christmas time. And then The Last Murder at the End of the World this summer. They're like, I don't even want to say they're like candy floss because they're a bit like that. But I didn't get a stomachache afterwards. I just felt like a lovely palate cleanser.
Yeah, because I think he is a really good writer. This one I thought, it sounded a bit downbeat.
He's a really good
like a
storyteller.
dystopia? Yeah. Don't they all, if they don't get off the island, don't they die or something?
Well, so my husband was a bit concerned because he knows that dystopian end of the world apocalypse novels can send me into dark funks. And you might think that from the flap, which begins, outside the island there is nothing. The world was destroyed by a fog that swept the planet, killing anyone it touched. On the island, it is idyllic. 122 villagers and 3 scientists living in peaceful harmony. Until, to the horror of the islanders, one of their beloved scientists is found brutally stabbed to death. And then they learn that the murder has triggered a lowering of the security system around the island, the only thing that was keeping the fog at bay. If the murder isn't solved within 107 hours, the fog will smother the island and everyone on it. But the security system has also wiped everyone's memories of exactly what happened the night before, which means that someone on the island is a murderer, and they don't even know it. Like, can't you see that being a computer game premise? Right? Like, all the ingredients are in place that you need to decipher what's happened and time is ticking and the fog is encroaching. Don't worry, it's not at all dystopian or depressing. It couldn't be. It's far too contained as a creation to really have you thinking in any significant way about our world, the state of the world, the state of the environment. No. That's all to one side. This is just pure entertainment, and it's so fun. So great. Also, cute cover, which I picked up from my local grocery store. Some great twists. You've got these 3 scientists. They're the original humans. They're very long living. And then you have these villagers who live in harmony with each other. They have this voice inside their head called Abby, which you sort of assume is some sort of AI creation that monitors everything they do, and that has seemed to wipe their memories after this murder, but also there seems to have been some, a murder, but also some fights, like things have burned down, and so they're trying to understand what has happened. Super fun. Super great.
He's
great. To read, probably read in 24 hours.
And that feels to me very much, if there is a formula for like great holiday read, I haven't been able to identify it, but it feels like that would slot in perfectly.
Yeah, absolutely.
Very quickly, because I'm conscious that we were supposed to be being brief, but we've both read this, have we not? Trust by Hernan Diaz. I finally got around to it. My goodness, the Booker Prize 2022. That's how long it's taken me to get around to reading it.
It was only longlisted, though.
It was longlisted.
It didn't make our shortlist. That was the problem.
I didn't read it, because I thought it was going to make the shortlist just because everyone was going on and on about how great it was, and then it didn't. Shock. It did win the Pulitzer Prize 2023. It's a novel. Well, you don't quite know what to make of it as you're reading, but gradually what you realise is that you're reading 4 almost separate books, seemingly written by different people, that actually are telling the same story in different ways. It's a very clever book. I think it executes the premise absolutely beautifully. There is a twist towards the end that I very much enjoyed and appreciated that I wouldn't spoil. But when I got to that, I was like, yes, happy that that's how things turned out. And it's a story about money. I was going to say wealth, the creation of wealth, financial markets. It's set in the, mid 1920s to end of the 30s. So it covers the Great Depression, the financial crash of 1929, and the main characters are involved in that, but actually come out on top. It makes you think of the Michael Lewis story, actually, about Big Short. And so it has all these contemporary resonances as well with the current way that people play the stock markets, and there are winners and losers. All of that's in there. And I thought it was very well done. I really admired it. At the end, I was just a bit puzzled. I was just like, what is this book about? I didn't know what he wanted me to take from it, and I didn't feel it was going to leave me with anything, and I felt a little bit disappointed by that. I did quite enjoy the ride, but I suppose I was reading it thinking there would be a point, and at the end, when I didn't really feel there had been one, I was just like, ugh, in that way. And I think, and then I thought, I think it's right it didn't get through to the shortlist. It was a good novel. It wasn't a bad novel, but it didn't feel like it stretched beyond that.
I think I read a review that used a similar term to what I was just saying about Stuart Turton. So completely different levels of novel, but I feel like both books are puzzles, like they're puzzle boxes that you have to unpack to understand. And that's what's very satisfying about Trust. Is you have to read the 4 sections to understand what was happening
and how they interlock. And that's in fact, it is only by comparing and contrasting that you piece together for yourself what you think is the real story, and the ambiguity of that is very interesting. And I mean, it's so clever. It's so clever and so well done. I just almost felt a little bit like a sort of an intellectual exercise. It didn't touch my heart at any point.
I agree with that, because I still think of it as a really exceptional book, but there was something cold and calculating and cool about it. There's characterization, but you don't care about any of these characters. There's some brutal depictions of, is it an insane asylum in Switzerland?
Well, it's a sort of sanatorium.
A sanatorium, that's the word,
one of the characters, the wife of one of the characters ends up. That made me think of the Magic Mountain.
Yeah.
I was like, I much prefer the sanatorium in the Magic Mountain. But also, generally, we've talked about this before, haven't we? How we always quite like the idea of a sanatorium and just being packed off someplace in Switzerland.
Me and Phil reading in reading
That's right, where you get fed well and
sent
just
to our rooms.
Get to sit out on your balcony in the evenings and wrap up in your fur rugs.
Most importantly to me is the enforced introversion.
Yes.
So I'd be like, well, you really aren't allowed to talk to your friends now. You have to go sit in your room wrapped up in blankets in the cool air reading. I'd be like, yes, please. That's great.
I think the only other thing I'd say is that I think it's very much a book about writing. It's a novel about writing and the process of writing. It touches on the idea of these different accounts of this story, and one of the characters is actually in different ways, all of the accounts are being written, and you are sort of seeing almost how they're put together. And so it's clearly a book that I think writers would really like and respond to, because I think all of that's in there. And I think if you're someone who's interested in writing and the process of constructing a novel, this would be very rich, because it feels like there's a lot about his process that's woven into this in a way that's really interesting to read. So yeah, I was glad I read it. Thank God I can finally check it off.
Yeah, exactly. Well, another book about money. I somehow coerced my book club into reading Come and Get It by Kiley Reid. She was the author of Such a Fun Age, which you read.
It was a real hit, wasn't it, when that came out?
I wouldn't say that it's not that didn't appeal to me, but I don't tend to read a lot of American fiction somehow related to domestic life in the present day. And Such a Fun Age, it was much more complicated than that. And I think it really struck the zeitgeist because it was about, this is my understanding, it was about a young Black woman who's a nanny for a very, very liberal, wetly liberal was the term I saw online, family. And I think there's some altercation in a grocery store where she gets questioned about why she has these white children, and it's kind of the spin-off ramifications from that.
Yeah, she's accused of kidnapping
as more of a social study. And it spins off from there. That got a lot of praise. Now, Come and Get It is very different. It is a campus novel, and it's set in Fayetteville, Arkansas. We have this journalist, Agatha, from Chicago, and she's got a placement there to teach. She's recently broken up with her wife, was her girlfriend. They kind of got married just to make sure that her girlfriend would have health insurance benefits because she was facing a terminal condition. Anyway, so Agatha has come to Fayetteville, Arkansas. She is that wetly liberal character, very successful journalist. She's had a number of books published. And she's arrived and she's going to research how people feel about weddings. And so she arranges an interview through a student RA named Millie, who's one of the only Black people really, certainly in this student residence. And Fayetteville is a very white town in the middle of Arkansas. And Millie arranges for this journalism professor, Agatha, to interview Jenna, Tyler, and Casey, these three very difficult to tell apart young women. And I think where Kiley Reid is very good is at dialogue and these highly cringe, but very believable phrases that come out of the mouths of these young women. And what Agatha realizes as she's interviewing them is that she doesn't really care about weddings. What she cares about is their attitudes towards money and how they think about money. And somewhat against her better judgment, she kind of stumbles into colluding with Millie to listen in on Jen, Tyler, and Casey, but also Jenna's roommates, Kennedy and Peyton, who share a student room next to Millie, and so she can listen to them have their conversations. And she does. She comes every Thursday and listens, and actually ends up writing up profiles of them for Teen Vogue. Along the way, everyone behaves very badly. And I said earlier that I foisted this on my book club. Well, I bought myself a copy of this, Come and Get It, in January because Susie Goldsborough had nominated it in January, very early on, for the Times Best of 2024 list, where they keep adding to it as the year goes on. And I think at the time I actually confused, because I was fact-checking myself today, I really thought it was Joanna Thomas Core, who in my mind can do no wrong with recommendations. So I was like, oh, she likes this book? Well, it's got to be great then. And I started it. And as I say, everyone behaves very badly. There's just this really grubby vibe. A grubby vibe to the whole novel where no one is doing the right thing. Everyone is culpable. Money seems to be the only real thing driving people's motivations or influencing people. And while that is an interesting topic for study, it seems to leave out so many other things that preoccupy us, love, relationships, family, even other shallow things like weight and social media. Social media does not appear in this novel. And I was like, when is this set? Because it's supposed to be set now or maybe right before COVID. But there was just something that felt very much like my university experience some 20 years ago, where I was like, how old is Kiley Reid? Like, is this really what kids are like now? Because again, where's the social media? Why aren't they talking about other things? They're only really talking about the most shallow things. It didn't feel wildly believable in terms of depiction of youth. I started reading it myself. I didn't get through it. When my book club was talking about what they should read over the summer, I was like, well, why don't we read this? And as it was, only Frances and Joe read it with me. And poor Joe was like, I hated it.
Oh, no.
She's like, I loathed it. But she said it with laughter in her voice. And towards the end, I was like, well, I feel a bit culpable now. She's like, no. It is very easy to read. It's very breezy, very light. I think a lot of people would enjoy it a huge amount. And Frances, who loves a campus novel, was more equivocal. She's like, it's not great, but as you say, it's very easy to read and an interesting study and well plotted, a little bit melodramatic towards the end, but quite distinct and hangs together. It's funny, Kate. I actually think you might like it. You might, well, who knows? You might like it, you might hate it.
I mean, love a campus novel.
Well, I know that about you. And it's got a great, I was lured in by this cover. I'm seeing a bit of a trend in the books we've been reading, actually, with these bright, vibrant backgrounds. This one is bright green with yellow font on it.
And a pig. Somewhat inexplicable.
Oh, I should say this is a book about money, but it is also a book about race. And where Kiley Reid, I think, really gets it right and makes you think differently is around race. And that's probably why Such a Fun Age was so popular, because it did feel like a really unique take. And you can see that coming out in Come and Get It, although race is not as much the focus as money and wealth and class.
It's nicely divisive on Goodreads. I see Jack Edwards, the internet librarian, gave it 2 stars, said, finish this book and still not sure what the plot or point was. And then they flagged up Mika, Meike, gave it 1 star, 58% in, and there's no discernible plot whatsoever. Yes, you might say that this college novel is character-driven, but what to make of this cast of 8 main characters plus several minor figures?
Who you can't tell the difference between. That was one of the things we talked about in book club, is that she takes quite a lot of pains to describe each character. But other than Millie and Agatha, the rest of the white young women all seem incredibly interchangeable. And you have to keep flipping back to be like, who is this one? Who's that one?
Yeah.
They feel like caricatures.
Will the professor, who, you guessed it, has an elaborate backstory with no apparent connection to anything, at some point play a relevant role for some kind of plot that might eventually unfold? If you now say this sounds like a jumbled, pointless mess, you are indeed correct. How could the publisher leave their author hanging like this, with a text in such desperate need of an editor who adds a level of narrative discipline? Then the very next review is 4 stars. This book made me so anxious when I read it before bed I had actual nightmares. That's a compliment. Everyone in this book is such a bad person, but also not a bad person. Literally nothing that anyone says is 100% true or fair. This is peak unreliable narrator book. It has about 100 characters and none of them can be trusted. You don't realise how often books have a voice of reason until you can engage in the chaos nightmare that is nobody doing so. Yeah, she enjoyed it. I feel like it's not for me.
Fair. Well, I actually think, given my book club, this is my London book club, and everyone is very committed. And I think many people opted out of this one. They were like, no.
Well, to end on, I'd love to talk about a book that also had me very much nonplussed. I did not know what to make of it. It's called All Fours. It's by Miranda July. Do you know Miranda July? Does everybody know Miranda July?
No, but she has had she always gets a huge amount of attention and coverage over here, at least. When she publishes. This is the recent book?
Yeah, so I was actually thinking, because I do know Miranda July, but then I was trying to think, well, why do I know?
You have her artwork, don't you?
I do. I have prints by her on my walls. So I feel like she's, she fits into this artist, writer. She's published books of short stories. I'm pretty sure I've read one of them. Filmmaker. She's a little bit annoying, though. But also linked to fashion. I think also, if I was completely at random, like, what could you say about her? I was like, oh, she's really cool. Because that's, I think, what I think about her. She just seems like a really cool person. But I was curious to read this book. So what I've been doing, I didn't tell you, I've been doing the loveliest thing this holiday. So I've been 3 weeks in this little town by the sea. It has one bookshop. And when I got here, I thought, right, I am going to read one book at a time. And when I finished it, I will go to the bookshop and see Steph, my friend, the manager, in there, and I will choose another book, and then I will only read one book at a time, like that, which is very alien to the way that I normally consume books. I normally have at least 2 on the go. I usually buy in clusters, and then of that I will read one, and the rest will be like, oh, can't wait to get to that, and then they tend to drift downstream. But this holiday I've stepped away from that a bit, and I've very much been going from book to book, and I was in the bookshop and had this lovely experience. When you go in, your choice becomes that much more significant, right? Yeah, because you're like, this is the book I'm going to read. I'm going to buy this book, and I'm going to leave the bookshop, and I'm going to read this book. So I damn well better consider carefully what it is that I'm picking up.
I love that.
And also, the other thing that's been really lovely, which I guess you can only do if you have one bookshop you're going to regularly, is that when I go back, Steph's like, oh, how was it? And we have this great chat about either she's read it and she's got thoughts of her own, or she's really interested to hear my take on it because she knows that that's going to feed into conversations she's having with other customers. It's been so enjoyable. I am going to miss it so much when I leave, and I'm feeling very inspired about trying to carry on. I'm going to need to cultivate some kind of relationship with the person in Hatchards, which is my bookshop that's closest to where I work in London. But
I feel like that's going to be harder work in London.
I know, they're a bit interchangeable there, but maybe there's a person. Maybe I can find a person. Anyway, All Fours. So this is Miranda July's perimenopause novel. I think the thing to say immediately is it feels...
that's interesting. It is a novel?
Yeah, it's a
It's
novel.
a memoir.
Well, interesting.
But-
Because what you get straight away is it feels very autobiographical. Even if you have only the sketchiest knowledge about Miranda July, like the sort of vague things I just threw out there, immediately this feels like this fits in with that. You're getting this woman and a bit of her domestic life, which seems quite cool and interesting. She's got a 7-year-old child who she does not gender. She refers to them as they, which I thought was quite interesting for a child that young, but fine. And she's married to a man who I think is a filmmaker or something creative. And she is excited about this trip that she's going to be taking to New York, where she's going to get away from the family for 10 days. And it's all about, oh, so great to have this time to myself. I'm so thrilled and excited. And you're like, yeah, great. This sounds like it's going to be really good for you. But then she decides she's going to drive there rather than fly. And she then's planning the cross-country trip. And then she finally gets up. She's all ready to go. It's a big thing for her. She hasn't done anything like that before. And off she goes. And she gets to a suburb of LA called Monravia. I can't remember now. Moravia? Where was it? Monravia. Could be like,
It's like in the Balkans or something.
it means nothing to me. People in America are like howling at me right now. It's like that time I didn't know about Compton. Anyway, she goes to this place and there's a motel there and she decides to pull in at this motel and get a room, and she ends up staying in the motel room, which she then ends up redecorating. She ends up hiring the girlfriend of a young man she met at the Hertz car rental place. So there's this passing encounter with this guy. She gleaned a bit of information. It turned out his wife works for an interior design company, but she's the receptionist. Our main character then calls this company, hires Claire, her name is, to redecorate the room, pays her $20,000 to redecorate this sort of sleazy motel room. It's not a fancy place at all. In the style of the Bristol in Paris, where our character, stroke Miranda July, once stayed. And he was like, oh my God, this is like paradise on earth. So anyway, this hotel room is redecorated in the style. Turns out that Claire, the receptionist, is actually a really fabulous interior designer and does an amazing job. So this room becomes this mini paradise in this motel. And the main character does not want to leave. And so she ends up pretending to her husband and child that she is having this experience in New York, and first of all plotting this imaginary car journey that she's on through all these states, and then finally this time in New York. But it's all lies. She's making it up. And meanwhile, she is reveling in this freedom that she has gained in this space that she's created that is outside of her normal life, outside of her domestic responsibilities, outside of all the usual routines and things that she's feeling trapped by. And in that, then, she's sort of interrogating lots of different things that are going on in her life. One of which is the state of her hormones. She's realized that she's perimenopausal and that her hormones are just this roller coaster. So she's getting treatment for that. She's getting HRT. But what she's examining is, I suppose, what I think probably all women are forced to confront when they get to this point in their lives, which is the degree to which throughout our entire existence, with the exception of when we were prepubescent, when we were children, we've been slavishly living by these hormones and our bodies fulfilling these biological functions. That's what we were here to do. And when you come to menopause and all that falls away, you really are left with who is the person? Who is the real person underneath all of this? And I think for a lot of women who've very much been occupied with a sort of almost like standard setup of a partner and families and just getting on with the busyness of that for 20 years, they look around and they're like, there's nothing. It's just a sort of void. And so the thing about All Fours is that it's not just anyone confronting the void, it's Miranda July confronting the void. And that's why it's good. That's why it's interesting. Because she sort of does it in this really kind of like wildly offbeat, very sexy, creative way. I love basically perimenopause as performance art, which is what I feel you get from this book, which is not a way I'd ever thought about it before. And I really, really, really liked it. It was great. I mean, I read much of it with my eyebrows raised. I really did. I was just really like, whoa. Well, like my... It's very explicit. There's a lot going on. She's bisexual, so there are relationships with men, with women. There's a slightly incomprehensible it's not non-sexual because it is sort of sexual, but relationship with the Hertz guy, which continues. She continues to foster this relationship, and he won't betray his wife by actually having sex with her, but they are bonding in other ways, I suppose is the best way to put it. And all of that's quite strange, but actually quite well thought through. And I loved where it ended up. And the thing, in a way, I can't stop thinking about. The thing it leaves you with, which I think is a real gift, is the room. It's just this idea of this room in this motel that's been decorated to be this extraordinary, sensory, exquisite space. And then she can go to this room whenever she wants, because the motel owner, he can rent this room for like triple what he was able to rent the normal room. So he's super happy with what she's done. And he basically says, well, look, you can come back and stay in it whenever you want. So she has a sort of regular arrangement where she can go back any Wednesday. And the freedom that this space outside her life affords her. And then she ends up reconfiguring her marriage, because it turns out, not unreasonably, her husband's also a bit like, well, hang on a minute, if you're going to do all this, then I'd also quite like to go and experiment with other potential partners and have my own Tuesday nights to myself. And then when you look her up, it seems that all of this is very much things that she's been exploring in a very real way in her real life. So yeah, I'm still processing it. I hugely enjoyed it. She's 50, I'm 50. I have to say, I wonder if you were in your 20s and you read it, I think you'd just be like, what the hell? But if you're of an age and you read this, I think you'll have a lot of fun. And ultimately, I recommend it. It was good. And as a novel, it's well executed. It's well written. I liked it.
Would this novel wind me up? You know me very well.
I mean, I think that's why it's fun. It's because it's really provocative in a great way and very original. If you're Miranda July, I mean, what's brilliant about it is that clearly to Miranda July, all of this stuff is just normal. And she'd perhaps be quite surprised, like, you know, the degree to which I was like, oh my God.
I've read an interview with her, so I know how this novel parallels her own life in a slightly less weird way, right? Like she rented the house behind her house and then eventually just like moved in.
Yeah, exactly.
How does she compare to Deborah Levy? Is she like an American Deborah Levy? With Deborah Levy obviously being, you know, much more grounded and less dramatic.
Yeah. I mean, it's very American. It's very Californian in lots of ways, it felt to me. You know, honestly, I took all of it on the chin. Really, I was very open to all of it. The only bit that made me practically spit out my tea was the bit where she was describing the bento box that she prepares for her child's lunch. And one corner of it was a kale salad with wheat germ sprinkled on it. And I was like, yeah, like a 7-year-old is going to eat that. Come on. Come on, Miranda.
That's funny.
But I don't think she's not trying to be relatable. And maybe to a Californian housewife, that is standard. I don't know. Who can say?
I mean, who could say?
But I suppose with Deborah Levy, I feel a real, you know, her life is not my life, but I very much recognize and can relate to her life. I didn't have any sense of that with Miranda July, but it was almost like, wow, this is like, I could aspire to be like this.
Okay. Or spy, which is what I thought you said, to spy on this weird and wonderful life.
I too could spend 20 grand decorating a room of a travel lodge, and then I could go there whenever I want. And do I don't know what.
One of the things I've realized is that my reading this summer has been very American. And maybe that's been part of the problem. But I will end with a bit of a high. It's very light reading, but I picked up Slow Dance by Rainbow Rowell at the Save On Foods while I waited for my prescription to get fulfilled.
I haven't heard of this one.
It's a Reese's Book Club book. On the back, it's got Gabrielle Zevin, the author of Tomorrow, 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 endorsing it. It's got your favorite Leigh Bardugo endorsing it. Curtis Sittenfeld gives her some shout outs. Anyway, Rainbow Rowell is a really great writer. Really simple, easy, and incredibly well-rounded, heartfelt characters. Very different to Come and Get It, where the characters feel very detached and you don't care about them at all. This is a very simple romantic novel about two best of friends in high school. A young man named Kerry and Shiloh, and they grew up in a rough part of North Omaha. And she wanted to be an actress. He wanted to go straight into the Navy. They were best of friends, but nothing ever happened until later in university. And then nothing happened again until their early 30s, which is when we meet them. And they're reunited. Shiloh's been married, divorced, has 2 kids. Carrie's been in the Navy. You couldn't get more Americana than this, and yet I loved it. I thought it was incredibly sensitive. And Rainbow Rowell is from Omaha. It feels like she's writing about people she knows. And actually, if anything, it reminds me a little bit of English writers who really embrace their, I'm trying to think of it like so often American fiction is really manicured, right? Whereas here, what makes these characters so human and touching is their vulnerabilities and the details she brings in. You know, like Shiloh's teeth are just terrible at the bottom. And that's one of the things Corey loves about her. Corey's covered in moles, but they're just these very human details that make these people so well-rounded as they figure out how they might be able to love each other and come together. It was really nice. Slow Dance by Rainbow Rowell. I recommend. I will have to run shortly because I have a small person who's joined me. All of that is to say, and I skipped this from my introduction, but I am trying to redeem my summer reading by finishing it off with Austerlitz by W.G. Sebald, which our dear friend Phil says is a masterpiece, and which was number 8 in the New York Times Best Books of the 21st Century. I'm a third of the way in. It's very good. But my husband was like, you need to get a different book because it doesn't really feel like you're enjoying it that much. I'm like, I'm enjoying it.
It's like because you're reading it with a bit of a frown.
It. Well, I'm just not devouring it. It's literature. It is very good. I'm sure it is going to be one of those novels, though, that the brilliance comes together in the end. You know how it's been crafted and how it all comes together. Have you read that?
I haven't. That was one of the ones I was hoping to get to while I was away. I'm going to try to read it because he really sold it to me. I'm actually currently reading Erasure by Percival Everett, which I'm really enjoying. I
got stuck because there's a novel inside a novel, and I didn't want to read the novel inside the novel, and so I haven't progressed. Have you read the novel inside the novel?
So what I'm finding really interesting is that I saw the film American Fiction. I really enjoyed the film, but that made me want to read the book. And reading the book, I'm enjoying actually the exact thing that you were finding problematic, which is that in the film, you don't get the novel within the novel. You get like a sense of what it's like, but you don't get it. And when I found that, I was like, oh, you mean I'm actually going to get to read, what's it called, My Pathology? It's in there. And actually, talk about clever books. It's clever in the way that Hernan Diaz's book was clever. It's so cleverly referential to things that you need to know to get the joke. And there's something really delicious about that. I'm admiring it very much. I'm not quite sure. I'm almost wishing I hadn't seen the film because the film was really good and it's very hard to get away from. Obviously, they made some different decisions in the way they did the film to the way that he's written the book. And I know what's going to happen. So yeah, but no, really, really interesting read. And,
okay, well, maybe I will get back to it with that endorsement.
And then I'm looking forward to the podcast book we're doing for September, which is Humanely Possible by Sarah Bakewell, the best-selling prize-winning author of How to Live, that was her book about Montaigne that I loved, and At the Existentialist Cafe explores the great tradition of humanist writers, thinkers, scientists and artists, all trying to understand what it means to be truly human. It was a New York Times bestseller. It was a Barack Obama Book of the Year. Oliver Berkman, beloved author of 4,000 Weeks, is a big fan. I can't wait to read it. I really like Sarah Bakewell. I love her writing. I think it's going to be great. So I'm looking forward to reading that. I feel like that's absolutely going to be perfect for back to school September, where I have that energy and that appetite for things that are a little bit more philosophy and big ideas, beautifully distilled for me in a readable way by Sarah Bakewell. That's what I want.
That sounds very good. And next up, though, with the Patreon book club is a discussion of The Fraud, right?
Yes, we're doing that, which I already read. So I will just be refreshing my memory on that one. And then I'm going to be discussing that next weekend with them. I can't wait.
With me, but I haven't started it.
Oh, you're going to join us. Yay.
Yes.
Oh,
maybe I need to put Austerlitz to one side and dive straight into The Fraud.
It's not a quick read. So yeah, do get going on that.
I might get a copy today. All right. Well, this has been great, Kate. I love a summer reading roundup.
Me too.
I'm just going to leave on one happy note. I mentioned my Vancouver Public Library party and that we got to go away with books. This is primarily for Kate listeners, but I got a pristine copy of Jonathan Strange and Mr. Norrell, Kate's favorite, some 1,000 pages of it.
One of the best books
770.
Ever.
One of the best books ever.
But you've read it, right?
A long, long time ago.
You didn't love it the way I loved it, I don't think.
Yeah, but I was a baby. I think I might.
Reread.
So,
great.
I don't know when I'm going to get to that, though. You got to read The Fraud first.
That's nearly it for this episode. Books mentioned were Greta and Valdin by Rebecca K. Reilly, The Garden Against Time by Olivia Laing, Real Americans by Rachel Kong, Headshot by Rita Bullwinkel, The Last Unicorn by Peter S. Beagle, Trust by Hernan Diaz, The Last Murder at the End of the World by Stuart Turton, All Fours by Miranda July, Slow Dance by Rainbow Rowell, Come and Get It by Kiley Reid, and Austerlitz by W.G. Sebald. I did not get a chance to talk about Thunderclap by Laura Cumming, so let me just sneak into the outro that it was wonderful. Cumming's father was an artist, and she interweaves her memories of the way he practiced his craft with her study of 17th century Dutch art, using the few works of Goldfinch painter Karel Fabricius as her anchor. I loved the way her writing made me feel as if I was travelling back in time and witnessing these extraordinary artworks being made. If it sounds like it might be for you, I'd say it makes for a perfect autumn read. If you're interested in following up on the reading lights we mentioned, head to seriousreaders.com/BCR, where you can get £100 off with our offer code BCR at checkout. With the nights drawing in, I'm finding mine more essential than ever. If you enjoy the pod, want to support me in making more of them, and also be part of my bookish club, you can sign up to the podcast Patreon account. The lower tier is just £3 a month, and in return, you'll get a weekly emailed update from me, occasional extra episodes of the show, and at the higher tier, you can come and talk books with me at our monthly book club, held over Zoom, with a recording so you can catch up anytime if you can't make it in person. We're currently considering philosophy with Sarah Bakewell's book Humanely Possible, and following up next month with The Heaven and Earth Grocery Store by James McBride, a critical hit in America, described in the New York Times as a murder mystery locked inside a great American novel. But will it be a hit with our group? I would love to have you join us to find out. Head to patreon.com/The Book Club Review for all the details. But for now, thanks for listening and happy book clubbing.